up in Canada. So it got trucked back and just sat in the field and rotted away in the state of Washington for many, many years. And actually, one of our trustees, you might have heard of Chinbro. You ever heard of that company, Chinbro? Does all the road work? Mm-hmm. It started by these brothers, Chinkets. And he took, Ken took 25 years of his life and all this money to restore this very area. And he got the first flight, and it's been flying ever since, not about 1999. So this airplane has been flying regularly since basically 2000, 99, 2000. It's got 360 horsepower. It's the granddaddy of the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine that was in the Spitfires and Mustangs in World War II. That's a V12 overheat. It's an amazing engine. That's the coolest thing to see fly. A lot of people probably haven't seen it fly. He didn't fly this year. He's down on the insurance. But anyway, there's not much else I can talk about. This is the first airplane that everyone's really done.
Yes.
So do you know what this stuff is constructed out of? Do you know what's underneath this stuff?
Canvas.
So that's canvas on the outside. So you can see all the rib stitching here, but it's all wooden framework. Most wings were all wood. And this aircraft has steel tube construction. So it's all welded tubing, which is a Fokker thing. Tony Fokker was way ahead of the game. And if you notice, this airplane behind you is about 10 miles of wires. Tony Fokker built internally braced wings with no brace wires. A very clean airplane. And high lift wings. You look at all these other wings, these are thin airfoils. But Tony Fokker had these high lift, thick, the upper wings about that thick. Pretty amazing. And actually, this airplane, before the trip, they converted to passenger carrying. So you can look in this thing, it's got wicker seats, got 4 wicker seats. Beautifully made up to carry short-term airline,
Did they have kosher meals?
I don't think they had any.
So this never actually made this run. It never actually flew as a passenger
completed
plane.
it. It started.
Right, sorry, but it never.
It started, but it never completed the run, which I believe is why this thing still exists.
But his question was whether it ever carried passengers.
Carry passengers?
Did it ever carry?
I believe it did before the trip.
Okay.
So in 1929, they had it all set up for this airline thing. In 30, they took the seats out and they put this huge tank in here. And there's already a tank there, and there was 2 tanks in the center section of the wing. So it was a very short time that they did this. There's no information that it did, but it was converted to that.
Okay.
So Carl, my understanding was that this was a venture, a commercial venture to prove viability of Pacific crossing. They had just done Atlantic crossing, now they were looking at opening up and exploring commercial Pacific crossing.
Yeah, and it was mostly races. Who was the first to do this? So they were competing with other guys that wanted to go across the Pacific. The world was just circled. The globe was just circled in 1924, and it wasn't many years that the world was circled by the U.S. Army in a bunch of airplanes. But they had a bunch of different things that crossed this Pacific. The Pacific's the largest body of water. Now, honestly, you go out and you give rides. You go out and you look out there. They're nuts.
What year is this plane again?
1923.
Okay.
There's Crescent 2324 built in Holland. There's a great article.
Okay.
And it's got a Spanish connection. It was tied to a guy that was going to go around the world with 3 airplanes, and this was backup for one. Apparently, this deal. Then it got stuck in Canada. Long story.
This thing looks so tail heavy. It looks like it looks
Trust me.
awkward.
There's no way. This is the question that you bring that up, because weight and balance wise, it can't carry passengers. When we fly this thing alone, just alone, it's nose heavy, and I put 2 sandbags in the back. You notice there's one now, 2 70-pound bags, and it got really tail heavy.
Really?
So I took them out. I took one out and left one in. It's about perfect with 1 70-pound bag in the back.
Huh.
Well, here's the deal. We don't run this tank. There's an 80-gallon fuel tank, which is forward of the balance point. So if you had all that weight, you had a full tank and 2 of those originally, so you would be more nose heavy, and you could balance it in the back.
So if you were going on long flights, after you gobble up your gas, someone's got to throw the sandbag out in the back.
Well,
Or get rid of a
Passenger,
passenger.
right?
There was only one. There was one pilot, and there was one mechanic, and he dealt with, fuel transfers and all that stuff to balance the airplane.
And then what was the issue? Was it a fuel supply issue?
Yeah, they couldn't get the fuel from here up to the engine. And there's an actual pump in here, and they think that's the actual pump that failed.
Oh, really?
So they landed in the field, the short field, fixed the problem, took the gas out, flew it to a larger field to refuel, and he hit a ditch on landing, and it put the wheels up to the wings, and that was the end of that. That was 1930.
Oh wait, is this the one that was left in the middle of a field?
That's the one. So
Okay.
you saw the pictures.
Yeah,
This
I'll
thing,
find the
there's-
pictures.
You look at there's some great pictures on that board over there, somewhere here, of this thing just sitting in a field. The fuselage just went through brush fires, the wings had burned up, the engine was laying in the shed, the cowlings and all that stuff. So he took and long story, but he ended up with all these parts in the middle 70s, early 70s, and started from there. Started in Pittsfield, rebuilding the airplane up there, and anyway, it's the only one in the world, and it flies like a dream, flies like a little Piper Cub.
Wow.
Just a
Big Piper Cub.
big
Carl,
Piper Cub.
can you explain how the radiator on this one travels?
Yeah, so I can actually show you. It's more interesting to show you how that stuff works.
Looks pretty tough to get up in there.
So it's actually on crank. Is it going in?
Oh,
Oh my goodness.
So the radiators are on tracks, and you can actually adjust your cooling, and there's a lot of drag right there.
Yeah,
So this airplane, according to the books, can go 130 miles an hour. We just baby it, and we do about, if it doesn't really work, 60 mile an hour cruising around.
Really?
We just baby this thing. I mean, this is a World War I engine. You know, that engine was built in 1918, and it powered bombers and all this stuff. And actually, that style engine was the first to cross the Atlantic Ocean. So Newfoundland to Ireland, in one of these, a bomber with two of these engines. So that Rolls-Royce Eagle was an astounding long-distance engine for its time. That was 1919.
It looks pretty beefy.
Pretty beefy, it was brand new at that point. So this, by then, 1930, this was getting to be really outmoded. There was a lot of monoplanes. The trouble with biplanes, you can only go so fast. So after a while, you got to start building monoplanes because there's just built-in drag. So technology was moving so fast, biplanes were headed out.
You know how you said that this plane used to be able to shoot from up there that had a
Yeah, there was a machine gun on
arm?
one side here.
So when did they, in the original planes way back when, didn't they like shoot their propellers off? When did they,
Early.
what year did they start sinking propellers to armaments?
1915.
Oh, okay.
Well, the French were the first, and they had a machine gun, and the French Roland Garros, and they put steel deflector plates on the propeller. They figured 1 in 10 would hit the propeller, so they would deflect that blade. Well, he was shot down, and they found Tony Fokker, this gentleman right here, saw the design and said, I can come up with a better idea within 48 hours. And he did. In 48 hours, he had cams and rods that would actually lock the firing pin out. It still happened once in a while, but
Is that how they
Tony
sink
Fokker
it?
was the first to figure out really the correct way how to shoot through a propeller. It all went downhill from there. So originally, if you look at that green pusher, not to get off the subject, but there's a green pusher on its nose. They built those airplanes a lot because the machine gun could sit forward and the engine was behind you, so they didn't have to figure that out. They hadn't figured it out yet. So pusher fighters were big, but they were
Are there any biplanes with wing-mounted armaments?
not really. Wings are pretty delicate and all that stuff, and jams, you got to be able to take a jam out and if it's sitting out there.
Sure.
You had to reload a lot of guns. Lewis guns, you had to, 47 rounds, you had to put another drum on and all that stuff. So you had to be near the gun. But this was built for that purpose, but it ended up in another purpose, which is kind of cool. Peacetime purpose. But anyway, it's the coolest, it's the most valuable airplane.
Why do you say it's the most valuable?
It's because it's the only one in the world.
Oh, because it's the
And
rarest.
it's the rarest, and that engine, a Rolls-Royce Eagle 8.
And it's original.
It's original. Yeah, it's an original Fokker built. There are no Fokker built pre-World War II airplanes flying in the world, except for here.
So the only thing that is redone are the wing
Oh, it's
material.
Totally redone.
Sorry?
It's totally redone, but you say re as in new. So it has new wood in the wings. Mm-hmm. The fuselage is all original, new fabric, of course.
Yeah.
But it's all the steel tubes, all original. The tails, most of the tails are original. Some of the struts, the cowlings, and the engine.
So just to reiterate something you said, it's not that this is the only model, it's the only Fokker built pre-World War
Well,
I.
it's that too, but it's the only C4 in existence.
Okay.
In any museum, static museum,
Right.
but it is the only one flying. It's the only Fokker airplane flying. It was one monoplane they had in Canada that they restored it and flew around, and that's now in a museum. So this is the only original Fokker built airplane. So that is
Wow.
quite a statement,
Yeah, that's quite feathered.
for anyone interested.
Yeah, yeah, that's pretty awesome.
But the cool thing with such a clean airplane, it'll land at about 35 miles an hour. It'll land very slow, but it'll go theoretically very fast if you push this engine. I'm sure. Look at that massive. It's a geared engine, so at idle, you see this thing around. The propeller literally spins this slow. You can see this thing just spinning
How
around.
big is that propeller?
Oh, is it almost 11? Is it 11 feet?
Holy cow.
Almost 11, I thought, 10 and a half or something like that. Yeah, it's massive, but again, that propeller only turns, it's a gear, it's 1.8 to 1 engine to propeller. So we turned, I remember turning this thing maybe about 1350. You're talking 700 RPM on the propeller. 750 RPM when we're flying. That's literally. Your car idles at 2,000 RPM.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, but look at the massive tree that it's turning across. It's pretty efficient airplane. But it does require a lot of handling on the ground. It's so heavy to lift this thing. It's 5 of us to get this thing off this dolly. It's sitting on a dolly. So you notice that dolly right there is not part of it. It's sitting on a skid. So airplanes in the old days had no brakes and it had a tail skid. And the skid was your brake. It would drag in the grass. All these airplanes flew on grass. They didn't fly on hardtop. So it would drag in the grass and slow you down and stop you. But just getting this thing running requires 5, 6 people. Turning it requires 3 people. Holding it back, running it up. It's a big production to get this thing going in the air.
Why wood for the props for so many of these? They just don't have the technology to alloy at that point?
Pretty much. They did start way back, but wood was king.
Right.
But the trouble is with wood, and by then they were starting to get to aluminum alloys and stuff. But it has to be so massive to be strong. So you got a big, heavy.
It was too heavy if
inefficient-
you were making. You couldn't cast iron,
Right.
use cast iron with the engines or whatever.
That's not one piece of wood, is it?
No, it's all laminated.
Okay.
So they will do is glue them all together, laminate it, then carve this propeller so it would stay straight and true. If you had one piece.
Oh.
Yeah, so it's all laminated for strength. But breaking, they broke a lot of propellers. I mean, it was cheap to do. I mean, break a prop, make another one. You get into aluminum, it kind of does damage to the engine.
Oh, sure. Okay. Yeah.
But doing this, and this is what we do here a lot in the time in the shops, recover airplanes. So in the old days, they had cotton and linen on here, and cotton and linen would go, it was organic, it would rot away in the sun. So you're talking 5 years, you'd have to recover these airplanes, cut them all off, and you'd have to re-stitch it, and do all this stuff. See, again, that's all stitching. You take a big long needle and you stitch through the wing and you tie it, and it's not hard, but it's just labor intensive. So a lot of sanding and then brushing and all that stuff to get a new finish. Nitrate, butyrate dopes will just shrink the fabric up every time.
Thank you, Carl.
Yeah.
Good job. Thank
No
you.
Thank
questions?
you.
That's the end of questions.
You're on film.
That's a Jeep. I thought we know more about the Jeep. There, it's orange.
That's next week.
I want to take notice.
Eve.